What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iRate Reviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to go back to the comic book shop for or not. So make sure you subscribe to get more of these every week. What I'm going to be talking about is Mr. Miracle number 4. So Mr. Miracle is a continuation of a story being told by Tom King and Mitch Gerads. It's got fantastic amounts of critical acclaim, and it's dealing with some very serious topics that are pretty interesting, really, when it comes to the overall scope of the New Gods, as well as the kind of injection of real life into comic book characters. So let's just dive right into the story. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be opening up the issue with Big Barda and Scott Free kind of like just chilling in their bed, and then all of a sudden somebody's at the door. But who is this person at the door? Obviously, Barda's not super impressed with this person, interrupting what they're doing, and it turns out that it's Light Ray. So Scott comes out in his Green Lantern shirt, and then all of a sudden he's accused of being an agent of Darkseid, an agent of Apocalypse, which just leads Barda to just start whooping on Light Ray. And ultimately, Scott isn't really incensed about this. He doesn't really have any feelings one way or the other. However, he is given the opportunity by Light Ray to have a trial. So he chooses to have just the trial sitting there right in his apartment because he wants to get it over with, and ultimately he's got some equipment arriving for a show. So that's just one of those really interesting kind of situations where it's just how scot-free or how carefree scot-free Mr. Miracle is. So we also see the, Barda and Scott sitting down watching Glorious Godfrey's television show, where essentially he's making a joke about the president getting into some hot water and how he would need a miracle or a Mr. Miracle to escape this kind of trap. But then we also get a kick over with after a Darkseid is quote that bumps into Granny Goodness, who's now, she's dead at this point in time and decapitated. So we also see the next trick that Scott Free, the next escape that Scott is going to be performing, which is him sitting a barrel on top of some railroad tracks. And that's when the story starts picking up and starts, creating momentum, and it starts driving like a freight train. Because what we have is we have the trial of Scott Free's Mr. Miracle happening right now. So we see the boom tube open up, Orion comes through, Barda and Scott are dressed in their various regalia, and they're like, well, we got a veggie tray, so, to try and entertain the guests. But this isn't necessarily about entertainment. So Orion comes through, Light Ray comes through, everybody's kind of set there, and then you've got this really small couch housing Big Barda and the other New Gods, while Orion stands on one far end of the room, walking out towards the window, and Scott is sitting in a chair, very casual-like. But what we get is that Orion's creating a logical trap for Mr. Miracle, and this is based on true and false statements, because the anti-life equation and the life equation, they're just polar opposites. So what you believe to be true, what you believe to be false, can be an indicator of your general nature and whether you're being manipulated by the anti-life equation or not. Or at least that's the reasoning that we get. But what we get is we get a pretty interesting line of questioning that goes, and it's basically stemming from various things. When Mr. Miracle doesn't necessarily know, or he can't necessarily understand the question, we get this distortion, kind of like it's on a television set, that we've been seeing through the first 3 issues. And it kind of proceeds on towards the middle, where, where Barda goes and answers the door because the microphone's been delivered and stuff like that. And that just kind of breaks a little bit of the tension before things get really serious. And this is where, the line of questioning, you hate your father, true. You hate the High Father, true. You hate me. And this is Orion asking these questions, true. And Scott just keeps answering true to all of these statements until we get to the final question. You are the anti-life equation. And then he just lets loose just this pent-up rage and aggression that he feels towards his father, towards the situation, towards everything that he doesn't understand, how he can't escape from this situation, and just lashes out and smokes Orion in the face and just starts screaming his head off, just like on the verge of insanity, just so fed up with the entirety of the situation that he can't seem to control himself. And Orion there, without his helmet, decked in the face, is just like, Jesus. And then he goes and he grabs a carrot from the veggie tray, dips it in the ranch sauce, and then eats it and says, oh, right, I can't contain you, but in 3 days you're going to be before my throne room for your execution, where I will take care of it myself. And then that means that Light Ray and everybody else leaves, and then we finally got Scott Free breaking down inside Barda's arms, and this all takes place over the course of maybe a few minutes inside the apartment. He's just like, I can't, and she's like, I know. And that's where we leave this issue. It seems really small in terms of its time scale, but the implications of it are extremely large. So we're talking about, this manipulation of the actual facts, or the manipulation, or not even the manipulation, but just the presentation of these very polar opposites that are allowing you to make a decision based on somebody's beliefs as to whether they're part of the anti-life equation or not. And it's really setting up Scott for his downfall, or at least that's the plan, it seems like. This seems to be an intention of Orion. However, the one thing that I can't really get over is the intensity, because when we start off this entire issue, we got Big Barda smacking down Light Ray. You can feel that there's this physical tension that's going to be happening in between these characters, and then once we get to the actual scene where we're having a trial, it doesn't really seem like a trial. It's more of like the cross-examination, the judge, the hanging, everything that really comes along with it, which Orion appoints himself. He is the defense, he's the prosecution, and he's the ultimate decider, because to have somebody else's judgment weigh over the High Father would be, an insult to the High Father, or, just a little bit of arrogance that's coming along from Orion. But when it starts to build up that momentum, you can actually see things change in the art. So as this line of questioning starts, Orion is physically on one side of the room, and then as you see him question people, as you see him question Scott free, he's moving from this side of the frame closer and closer and closer and closer until we actually get Scott and Orion basically nose to nose before Scott Free decks him and leaves him on the ground, just in shock and awe as to what's happened. And this is just another instance of Tom King and Mitch Gerads operating on a level, between artist and writer that is just beyond what you can normally expect in comics. They're so in sync when it comes to this story and how to tell it visually, as well as how to include the dialogue and those kind of things. The pacing of it was amazing. Like, it just built so much momentum until you had that final crescendo and release, and now we get to start a new arc. So, this is not necessarily Scott trying to deal with what's happened in the past or kind of cope with those things, but this is Scott dealing with the present and how the implications of the past affect it. So this is moving on into, issue 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then finally 12. This last 2/3 of this book are really going to be telling as to how everything's going to be handled and what really comes of this. But this is just an indication of the future. Things have to get worse for Scott before they ultimately get better, which just has me super excited for where this book's going to go. I highly recommend that you go grab Mr. Miracle. If you haven't had a chance to get issue 1, 2, or 3, you need to go grab them because they're fantastic. And then number 4 just kind of ratchets it up a notch in a very kind of compressed time scheme. So I'm really excited about this. Definitely a recommendation for me, but I want to know what you guys thought about Mr. Miracle number 4. Were you excited about it as I am, or did you have some issues with it? Let me know in the comments down below. But if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.